Welcome to Simone Quilts Design Session number 5. This quilt was sent in to me by Cathy. She is a wonderful quilter and has some experience with a long arm, and she's getting into using rulers to create her designs now. So the designs I will be discussing in this video are going to lean more towards the intermediate and advanced quilter, really digging into maybe some secondary designs. If you're a beginner, this is still something that you might want to listen in on. It's always a good way to learn by seeing examples beyond your current skill level. So I'm going to go ahead and start with what I always start with, which is just observation. Things that pop out at me, things that I know I can try to work with. So for this particular quilt, we're seeing that there are 5 stars, which means we have an opportunity to alternate between 2 designs, and that would help achieve a more balanced look. We have a rail fence type design in the background. These sets are not the same, so they're pretty random, which means that we could probably go with something more randomized, or we could play around with completely ignoring the fabric itself and going with a secondary design. It's also very scrappy, so maybe that means not necessarily doing any kind of ghost shapes for the star shapes of the star shapes, but we would definitely want to look at maybe some other secondary designs within the rail fence part. It also has 2 borders. One is really skinny, and it's that white border, the inner border, and one is large, and it seems to have a cross-hatching print on it, so we'll have to keep that in mind as well as I continue. And next I'm going to go ahead and think of particular design options for each of these elements that we've now observed. Cathy did mention that she is making 2 quilts with the same pattern using similar fabrics. So I want to make sure that I give Cathy enough ideas that she could potentially use this for 2 quilts. So I'm going to be giving 3 ideas for each of the different elements of the design, so she can pick and choose which ones that she would like to work with, or mix and match depending on how she feels. So the first one that I want to start with is the stars. Unfortunately, blowing up this image kind of makes it look blurry, but I needed it to be a little bit larger in order to play around with the different designs. This is something that I hope will still convey the message of the designs that I'm trying to work with, even though the image is a little blurry. So what I wanted to point out here is that both of the stars, even though the centers have a different fabric, the background fabric is the same. So what we could potentially do, if we're just looking at this section here, is do a common background design. So if we want to make sure that this area is pulled together, it looks unified, then we would want to make sure to outline these stars to give it some more definition. So what you could do here, if you wanted to make things simple, is to do an overall design. So, these are pretty sharp star points, so you could do something like I'm sure you've seen me do a lot before by now, is doing swirls, because swirls are always a good idea. Swirls and paisleys. So you can see that by adding this common element in the background here, really unifies the whole centerpiece here, and the stars are part of one design. Or you can treat each piece individually. So you can have an alternating design. So you would have design 1 or A, design B, design A, B, and then A. So you could have an alternating design like that. Or you can have all 5 be different designs so that they all are unique. So that means you would want to do something different for the background as well as for the star itself. So if we want to look at the individual elements of the stars, it's basically made up of these spikes here and this center square area. So for the spikes, you can do a double echo, Nothing too crazy there. It would really help it pop out. Or you can do something inside of the spikes to make them stand out. So you would have a design, for example, you know, I'm just thinking of something kind of circular. You could have a pebble design within the spike to help it stand out that way. So that has directly to do with the spikes themselves. If you wanted to emphasize the fact that it's a bright star, you might want to do kind of a ghost shape of spikes, adding extra star spikes in here to really emphasize that shape. And you would want to treat this ghost shape, fill or design, whatever you choose to do with that, you'd want to repeat it with this ghost shape as well as the ones that are actually pieced. For this center square, this is a pretty decent size, so it's kind of hard for me to tell from a picture what the size of this particular square is, but say it's a 5-inch square, you can make that as dense as you want. And when it comes to ruler work in particular, there's some fun stuff that you can do. So you can make this connect with a spike here, connect with the spike there, and maybe make some designs here and here so that you can use your straight ruler. Or if you wanted to go with a more circular design, if you had a circle ruler, you can do something like concentric circles. You can do a curve shape like this. Maybe add in some shapes in the corner by combining ruler work and free motion. This is kind of a really, almost treat it like negative space in a quilt. Just make sure that it's the right density that you want, and really anything in that center square would look great. So the other part of the quilt that you would want to play with, so now we're going to kind of focus on this rail fence area here and here. You can do some pretty cool stuff with this. You can have a specific filler only quilted in a stepping stone type fashion, like this. So you would have a specific fill or special design in those areas, and then have a different all over design in the other areas. And that would help these kind of stepping stone pieces, a special design in there, really help it pop out, especially against kind of this busier fabric. Another option would be doing one type of design here and another type of design here, and kind of repeat that and do that with these vertical, treating them like vertical stripes, but treating them as one unit instead of these separate rail fence blocks. And the third option would be that you would want to make the random fabric choices not only a part of your choice as the quilter, this is how you've chosen to make this quilt. You like that random, that scrappiness, and you want that to be reflected in the quilting as well. You could choose to do a different fill for each one of the fabrics that you've chosen. So you would want to do the same fill for every yellow, and then the same fill for every gray. And that would actually, and that would really play up the random nature and the kind of like the scrappy nature of these rail fence blocks. And then the last part of the design that I wanted to talk about is the borders. This is a pretty thin border here. Like I mentioned, it's kind of hard to tell in a picture how thick that border is, but I'm guessing it's probably about an inch, inch and a half. And with really small borders, when I plan to do a lot of dense quilting within the main portion of a quilt, I usually leave those thin borders alone. I want them to pop out. I want there to be a place where my eyes can rest, and actually leaving an area unquilted helps the other parts of a quilt stand out more. So personally, because that's just my style, I would leave that border alone. And the next thing I would focus on is doing something with these big borders. That looks like maybe a 4-inch border to me. The interesting part about this border is the fabric. So it actually looks like, I don't know if you can see this in the video, but it looks like Cathy almost fussy cut the hashing of the border. So there is a seam right here, but it looks like she fussy cut it so that when she joined the borders, the hash mark here, it looks like the hash mark design here continues throughout the border uninterrupted, so you can't really even see those seam lines, which is pretty cool. And if that's the case, then I think one of the best options would be to actually follow the hash mark design in the fabric. So take your ruler and outline the hash marks here, and you can either leave it like that, leave it at that density, or you can do an alternating fill in the squares that are left in the hash mark. So here, 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 like that. Kind of like a checkered look like that, so that the fabric that was chosen for the border really stands out. If the cross hatching of the border is kind of light, and for some reason in this picture it just shows more, but if in person it's not very obvious that that's what that fabric is, then another option would be to create a completely different secondary design. So I would take an element of the quilt design in the main portion of the quilt design and use it in the border. So to me, immediately what I would want to do is choose the spikes of the stars and maybe create my own template or just figure out what the angle is and do something similar to that shape within the border. So it almost looks like there's pieces of stars coming out in the border. So it ties, and then use the same fill that I used for some of these star spikes. I would use it here in the border to kind of draw it all together. And the third option would be, of course, to do something completely free motion, in which case, well, with a curved ruler, you can create your spine. And you know what I'm going to say. I'm going to say feathers, because feathers are just magical in a border. I do not know one quilt that has feathers in it that I haven't absolutely loved. So I would just do a very flowy feather design, you know, all the way around and try to make it a continuous feather border. So that's covered all three main elements of this quilt. Cathy, I hope I gave you enough ideas that you could use for both of the quilts that you've made. They're beautiful, and I love the fabrics that you chose, and I am so excited to see what it is that you do end up doing with these quilts. So I hope you enjoyed seeing my thought process for creating some quilting designs for this quilt top. You can find all my design sessions on my website at simonequilts.com or on my YouTube channel. You can click on the link in my bio to sign up to get quilting design ideas for your quilts as well.